for ScriptCamp. This is where we are going to help you learn how to organize and refine a pitch, ultimately trying to come out with a 1 to 2 minute long pitch for a feature or TV pilot project. And just moreover learn kind of how to efficiently communicate stories. We have several different guest hosts for this class, and this will take place over 4 weeks starting today. So for the next 4 Sundays, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., we will be doing these. So thank you so much for coming by and being with us. Make sure to sign up for ScriptCamp if you want to participate in the other ones. Couple things right up top. Let's make sure to keep our mics muted unless you're called on, but we will have lots of chances for folks to pitch today, regardless of how much you have, or if if you've only worked out a little bit of it, or if you have practiced it for a long time. Regardless, we'll try to meet you wherever you are to improve your pitch as much as we can. So let's take a look at our slideshow and let's meet our guest. So let's click to the, 1 second, I might have to turn off push to talk actually. Give me 1 sec. Okay, this should work. Hopefully folks can still hear me. Let's go to our first slides here, and these are going to be the troubleshooting slides. So we'll provide a link to the slideshow in just a minute, and you can go back through these if you're having some issues being heard or speaking, or hearing us. So it should give you a bunch of ideas for things to look at. Always make sure to check if you're muted or unmuted. In the bottom left corner of the screen, there should be a microphone icon that you can find and use. Let's look at quickly what is ScriptCamp. We are a screenwriting community focused on helping you take your concept from idea to draft to more polished script. We have lots of free classes, events, and workshops like this one, this free intro to the pitch workshop, but then we are going to, we also have a lot of these paid classes for members as well, boot camps and writers labs, which are on weekends. So a little about me. If you do not know me yet by now, I teach the boot camps and the weekly writers lab on Saturdays. My name is Connor. I've been writing feature-length, full-length scripts for about 11 years. Moved to LA in 2017 and have been repped and working since then. Wrote an episode of Creepshow back in 2019 for Shudder and have placed in Nickel quarterfinals, Nickel semifinals, Launchpad top 10, and have a thriller script set up at a production company in town in the last year. So I focus on feature films, but I know quite a bit about pilots as well, and I'm learning more about books and have written 4 novels at this point, and at some point we'll start offering classes in that too, but still kind of like assembling the groundwork for that one. But yeah, just a wide array of interests for me. Action, thriller, and horror are always going to be the kind of bedrock of my interests, but I like everything from musicals to westerns and really just a pretty broad range. And then Scott, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Sure. You can all probably just see what it says in the bio there, but basically I am a feature screenwriter also. Been writing for about 20 years now and have optioned and sold a number of feature scripts and have had a couple produced. I live in LA now. I'm repped at CAA, and I've got a couple things coming up in the pipeline, as it mentions there in the little bio, in addition to the stuff I've already had produced. And mostly I write genre features. I started out writing comedy actually, and then transitioned into horror and thriller, and that has now sort of broadened out into sort of more sort of general action, western, crime, drama, sort of anything with a genre element I've dipped a toe in at this point.
Anything with people with guns shooting them at each other.
Yeah.
Love it. Thanks, Scott. So we'll also have a couple other co-hosts for our later classes. We'll have Conor Rowan, who is going to be our sort of TV specialist, who's been longtime assistant on shows like ABC's American Housewife and Everything's Trash, and also specializes in comedy. So that he'll be here on the 24th. And you should, if you have TV pilot pitches, you should refine them as much as possible for that, because that's his sort of specialty. We'll have a couple other guests as well that have yet to be announced. About the boot camps, so these are going to take you from idea to first draft using my step-by-step practical method in these 2-hour weekly classes. These last 8 weeks for the feature one, 6 weeks for TV pilot. We just added playwriting recently, which is halfway through its course, or a little more than halfway at this point. So that's 6 weeks for the stage play and 4 weeks for the rewrite, which meets on Saturdays. We also have 4 weeks for this here at Pitch Bootcamp. You can join at any time, even if it's not the first class, but you'll get more out of it if you can sort of like build the skills incrementally rather than just jumping in late and just trying to pitch blindly, just going into it, winging it. So the more of these that you take, the more you will hopefully be learning and gaining from this and refining your own project pitches as you go. So let's look at the schedule for this one. So this is today. We're going to talk about organization with Scott, and we'll have we'll have time for the students here to pitch their projects and to get feedback on them in a similar manner to the ones that we've done before. We did one for Screenwriters Network, which is now called ScriptHive, which you can find on YouTube, which we've linked, which you should probably review if you're going to be doing these classes, because there's lots of good points of discussion there and things to keep in mind. Your job for this next class is going to be to prepare a sort of 1 to 2 minute pitch. Obviously, if you are coming to this class with just a little bit prepared or you aren't 100% sure if it's too much or too little, we can help you sort of work with it and refine it a bit today and just give you feedback on what you have. But the goal for next time is try to actually practice and rehearse 1 to 2, 90 seconds-ish that explains the story. You don't have to go all the way through to the end. We'll go through some of the rules, but just practice that, use what we do today, and work on these skills before next week. You also want to read a pro script from the blacklist, which we have a link to find all those scripts there, and also on ScriptHive you can find a big directory of a lot of these to choose from, and to sort of work on how you would pitch this to somebody, pretending it was your work. Remember that pitching something that you didn't write and that already sort of exists in the world has its own kind of challenges that we can get a bit into. But you have to, in order to be a screenwriter, get very good at just communicating stories and just efficiently summarizing information in such a way that anyone can get it and can sort of see the movie, as we say. When you say they can see the movie, it's like you've given them enough that they can imagine the major set pieces, imagine the sort of arc of the character and where it sort of builds to, and sort of see enough of it that they might feel good either asking to read it or investing in some way in that project. So, week 2 is going to be about performance. So that's next weekend. You're going to work on refining this pitch to incorporate perhaps a short bio or personal connection with the story, if that's relevant for you, especially in TV. That can really, really tie into the strength of a pitch if you have some sort of connection to the material. Reading a TV pilot script and being ready to pitch it will be a good practice for that as well. Week 3 will be on advanced techniques. Conor Rowan will be co-teaching that class with me. We're going to refine the pitch to incorporate necessary details and sort of like maybe expand on the interesting world or the interesting character that this show or movie centers around. And you're going to start working on that final version of that project pitch for next week, which is the week 4 final pitch on May 1st. We've actually swapped Conor Rowan to the week before, but we're going to have another guest to hear pitches and sort of talk about writer's room dynamics and hierarchy and all those things that you have to know for TV writing. So, pitching is super important for any type of writing that you're doing, whether you're writing novels or features or TV pilots. You always have to be able to efficiently summarize information and communicate stories quickly and leave all the irrelevant stuff out. So we'll get much more into that. And if you want to enroll, you can do so scriptcamp.net/classes to buy the course on its own, or you can start your free unlimited trial, scriptcamp.net/membership, which gives you 2 weeks free trial. So please sign up if you want to be in the additional classes. And if you're watching on one of our stream places like YouTube or Twitch or Twitter, then you can join us on Discord. Make sure you do have to download Discord. It's all free, but you can join our community called ScriptCamp and take part in this bootcamp and many others. Here's a breakdown of the different membership options. Note that the unlimited membership does include all of these camps, all of the labs, 70 hours of classes a month, and access to our video library, which has recordings like this. There will be a recording of this one, and private Discord channels, many other things that are broken down here that you can look at. Our lowest membership is just $5 a month. That gets you 8 classes, as well as access to that library and the private channels. So feel free to take a look at those there if you want. But we really have to move through this. Oh, yeah, last note, which this will be on consultations and proofreads, which are discounted for members. You can see a breakdown of what these include here. And you can just find more at scriptcamp.net if any of this is of interest to you. We also have this thing. They've done similar stuff to this. If you're a member of ScriptHive, maybe this will be a little more familiar to you, but we're adding this thing called Script Coins. So you can type $store into any chat channel to see a breakdown of how many you have and how to get them and what you can like use them for. But basically, the more you participate in the server, if you give feedback to someone, for instance, you get like some Chuck E. Cheese tokens that you can spend on, you know, mouse pads and flip-flops and bags and things. But you can also, if you get enough of them, use them to buy membership to ScriptCamp. So by just participating, you will earn enough coins to perhaps sign up if you'd like to do that. You can earn a table read of your complete feature or pilot, as well as many other services and fun stuff. So type in $store to see how that works in the chat. And just remember, you get it by participating. Lab is going to be on Saturdays from 4 to 6, and these are these one-on-one development sessions, kind of like office hours, where you can come in and I and my co-hosts will just help you with whatever questions you have, whatever topics you want to know more about, and whatever pages or outlines you want us to look at. Up to 5 pages we can usually break down to tell you either what's working on the page, or we can look at an outline and give you suggestions and help you structure a script or just work on an idea in whatever way you need. So any specific problems that you're having, bring them to Lab. Saturdays 4 to 6, that's included in unlimited membership, so please take advantage of that. Before we get started, so about this course, this is for fun, to refine your idea and to teach you methods of efficiently communicating stories. So be prepared to hear that some parts of your idea might not work, and while you can pitch something that you've written or something that you just have an idea for, it might be a little more challenging to hear, for instance, if it's something you've spent years on and you're pitching that, to hear, oh, fundamental parts of the story are not adding up. And that might be because we're just not sort of seeing those in the pitch itself, or it might be kind of like, I've noticed on our last one, Scott, that it sort of turned into like, since so many people were pitching something they've already written, it almost became like story diagnosis time, rather than like, it's as much, oh, there are flaws in the story, as it is there are flaws in how you are communicating it sometimes. So I find it can be a little better to have to get good at pitching things that you have not yet written, just because so much of screenwriting revolves around that idea. Have you found that to be the case?
Oh yeah, I mean, people need to spend, in my view, a lot more time sussing out ideas before they get into the writing process. So that's why you wind up in these situations where someone's pitching something, and then you'll have a question, and it will sort of lead to this entire unraveling of something, but they've already written it, so they're sort of pot committed to whatever issues there are. Whereas if you go through this kind of process before writing, you can sort of head a lot of those concerns off at the pass.
Right. And also, when you sign with management, I have found, and my friends have found, usually they don't really care about the stuff that you already have done in your portfolio. Normally they're like, let's do a new thing that I can work on with you together from the ground up, because they're going to have so much more sort of investment in something that like a lot of reps nowadays feel like they want to have a direct hand in every stage before they take something out for the first time. Were your reps like that as well when you got going?
Yes and no. I mean, they definitely wanted to see everything that I had and see what was viable in their eyes or what wasn't, but primarily, for sure, going forward has been a collaborative process. Yeah.
Right. And they're going to want you to give them 1 sheets and 3 sheets before you commit to, writing out, spending hours or spending days or weeks writing out drafts. More often than not, they'll want to be able to kind of pick their favorite of all the ideas that you have and then pretty extensively develop it with you. I mean, different reps do work in different ways. Some are more hands-on or more hands-off, but the ones that break new writers, at least amongst my friends and I who have been signed in the past 5 years, have mostly been like, nope, let's start something brand new that I am helping you with from, every step. So to do that, you have to be able to give them a 1-page version of it, or a 2-page version of it, or a 3-page version of it, or the 20-page, where you go up from 1 sheet to 3 sheet to treatment. All these things that are like, you have to be able to package the same information of the story into just different shapes. So we'll talk about that kind of idea of like the different size boxes in which to contain a pitch today. But moreover, what we're looking for are clear and high concept pitches that bloom in the mind to suggest an entire compelling movie. You can pitch a TV pilot as well, but if you do, then don't pitch the whole, like, try not to focus too much on stuff that you're not going to get to in the pilot. Like, just pitch us the pilot, and you can, like, suggest where the show is going, but you can't be like, well, that's not going to pay off for a season or 2 seasons, or that's not going to pay off till episode 12. Like, just try not to be too diffuse with how you are presenting a TV show. Primarily just focus on the story of the pilot and suggest like, oh, and these are like the kinds of conflicts that were the things that we're going to be building towards in the rest of the show. You don't want your pitch to rely on things that you're not going to be able to pay off. So the way this is going to go is we'll start with title and genre and comps or clarification of tone if needed. And then we'll read the logline. So if you do not have a logline written out for whatever it is that you want to pitch, you should be working on that as we're talking in this first kind of act of class. So on your sticky note or on your Google Doc or whatever you've got, you should be just trying to refine a logline that's, something like, when inciting incident occurs, an adjective protagonist must conflict before stakes is kind of like the default template. You don't have to use that exact template, but those are going to be the questions that are at the core of the pitch if you don't get to those things. So we'll read the logline, you'll wait for clarifying questions on the logline, and then we'll tell you, go ahead, tell us more. So you'll have 90 seconds-ish. We'll cut you off after 3 minutes. And you don't have to go through every single beat all the way through to the ending. It's more sort of like making a verbal trailer and explaining why this specific journey will be fun and interesting. And you can stop kind of basically around the midpoint and then suggest the trajectory for the rest of the story. So you're like, and now that this has happened, they must blank before blank. Is kind of how these things usually go. So at the end of that, we'll have more questions and conversation and feedback, so be prepared to talk and answer questions and receive notes for about, 10, 15 minutes, depending on how many people we have actually pitching here. The goal of this is to both strengthen the presentation of the information and also possibly diagnosing issues in the story itself that become obvious to us as you are just communicating what you have. So any questions on that so far? Everyone kind of get the basics of what we're doing. We're going to go through more ground rules and some like guidelines and tips for pitching before we go into them. But in about 10 to 15 minutes, be prepared to read out your logline and like tell us all about your story. So any questions so far? And for text, make sure you're using the pitch class text channel on the left-hand side of your Discord window. If you scroll down in the discussion folder, at the bottom of that, you'll find one called pitch class right here. And we can see your chats in that. And also, we will be able to read out your loglines and things from there. So please be prepared to paste them in there so we can pick some to read. Any questions? It seems like no questions. All right, no questions. So maybe we could talk a little about this idea of the smallest box, which is you can categorize different types of pitches just by the size of, or like the scope of the story. Remember that like you gotta kind of organize it to hold the listener's interest first, and as your story kind of blossoms from its most fundamental expression to these granular details, you can think of the story as like a big box, and within that box, there are smaller boxes that represent less and less complicated versions of that story. So instead of just diving in and trying to include everything, we usually try to start with just like the smallest box, the simplest version of the story. It's a pulpy space opera adventure that's kind of like Buck Rogers meets Jason and the Argonauts. I think that it's going to be pretty clear what this one is first, but you want to always start with you want to be able to tell us the kind of story that it is. So that's why we start with title, comps, and clarification of tone like that, so that we're primed to understand it the right way. And then you might have just like a really, really simple version of it that you would be able to tell. If somebody's like, what are you working on? Oh, I'm writing this movie about this farm boy with supernatural powers that has to take down a tyrannical empire superweapon to save a budding galactic rebellion. That's like just not even really a complete logline, but it's just sort of the condensed version of what the story is. Remember, we're still including a description of the main character, so you can't really leave the main character out of almost any kind of pitch. Like, you really, really have to have a strong focus on the protagonist in these things. You don't have to get too much into details or who he teams up with or the central relationships or anything like that in just the basic, simplest expression here. Then you might be able to unfold that a little more. And the slightly bigger box is when his parents are killed by the forces... oops, there's a typo there. By the forces of an evil galactic emperor, a naive farm boy joins with a hotshot smuggler, a tough princess, and a mysterious monk to take down the Empire's superweapon and save a budding rebellion. It's like, okay, now we have, what have we added to that? Inciting incident, or the catalyst, when his parents are killed by the forces of the Emperor. We have the central relationships, which are Obi-Wan, Han Solo, and Leia. Although I think that the smaller box version of the story could be like a bunch of different stories. It's kind of how, like, Star Wars has that monomyth element to it, where it's like that could be a bunch of different things. But this is where we want to get more specific. But just because you are giving more information for the story doesn't always mean you need to be adding like exponentially more words. You can still almost always communicate the idea for a story in one sentence. Sometimes 2 sentences are required, but most of the time that I see 2 sentences, I'm like, you could have done that in 1. Any thoughts on this so far, Scott?
No, I agree with all of this.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I'll check the chat too, so guys can feel free to weigh in and text whenever you like, and we'll be checking questions and comments periodically. All right, so a couple tips. Remember to include this brief explanation of the tone if it's going to drastically affect how someone is going to imagine the story. So if we say this is a pulpy adventure movie with a tone like The Mummy, we're going to understand that very differently, as opposed to if it's like, a super serious, really scary adventure story. We're going to understand if you just give us a comp or you sort of like prime us to understand the tone, we might understand, okay, this might be a little jokier or quippier. This might have a romance element to it. We might not, just make sure that you're priming us to think of it in the right way so that it all sort of adds up and makes sense. For features, you usually want to clearly lay out the story's walls, so time frame, boundaries, or ticking clock. For TV, you don't always need as strict of walls, meaning boundaries, but that's why we're going to mostly focus on the pilot itself. So think of the pilot as like a little movie, and in explaining the story of that little movie, even if it's like a sitcom or something like that, you're still going to have that motivation, stakes, urgency, and boundaries just to be able to communicate that well. So don't include background or context that is not essential. I thought of this when I was camping in Alabama. Unless it's about camping, that's probably not super relevant. Don't use character names unless it's based on a real person or a public domain character, like a young Harriet Tubman, for instance. You would use that character's name because that is a real historical figure. But if not, no one's going to remember your characters' names. So don't say like, a determined detective named Jeff. It's like no one cares that his name is Jeff. So don't include it. I will also say, in describing your character in either a logline or the pitch, try to avoid describing them in like the first snap way that you would think to describe a character like that. For instance, and I see this pretty often because somebody just like won't be able to just think of another way to make their person more unique. So they'll be like a determined detective, and it's like we would assume that a detective would be determined. It would actually be noteworthy if they weren't. So try not to just pick the first snap thing that comes to mind. A protective mother, a determined detective, we want to avoid just like try not to make it sound like just a description of the genre, and you have to find the specificity and uniqueness in that story and make it feel like, oh, I picked this person to go through this quest for a reason, because it presents some kind of interesting irony or juxtaposition, or is going to be a particularly uphill journey for that person. So focus on the main character. The characters you're going to mention are going to be the protagonist, maybe the antagonist or central relationship, but beyond that, probably none. Ask yourself, though, why this specific person? And you want to be always implying this internal journey that is going to intertwine with the external one. So I have this example from some subreddit. A purge-type society where every day a random citizen is chosen to be publicly hunted for a bounty. Man becomes the target and must escape. It's like, okay, cool, but why that guy? Unless we know why that guy, then it's going to feel like it's not a complete movie idea, because it is just like a concept for the world, or it's like it's a hook but without the character. And a hook without the character feels a little flat, and sometimes it'll just be like, here's an interesting situation. A guy is in that situation. And a guy is just like, you got to pick someone that like has some fascinating journey to make there, or is like, for instance, that we see this a lot. Scott and I were actually talking about recently in Minority Report, for instance, which is a good example of like really fascinating, complex concept for the world. Guy needs to sort of take a tour of all the interesting things in this concept, but why that guy? Oh, it's because he's a poster boy for that system. He's the top cop at the psychic cop agency. It's like, yeah, of course he's the most interesting one, because A, he can like experience the highest highs and lowest lows of that world as he goes through it, and the fact that he is forced to sort of reckon with the flaws in that system give him an interesting, ironic journey to make. It makes him like him going through this quest of proving that I'm not going to be a murderer, becomes also the journey of him realizing everything that's wrong with this society and everything that he has worked for and everything that he has stood as a symbol of. So that's why that guy, in that case. You gotta have a why that guy element, or else we're just gonna be like, just a person is not really adequate for a hook and a journey. It's not gonna feel like a high concept movie pitch if you're just like a dude in that world. And last,
I would add one thing to that, in that some cases, I think it's not necessarily so obvious at the start of the story why that is the right person. They will, like I was just thinking about this the other day in terms of like E.T. is a little boy who meets a little boy alien. It feels like any little boy at the start. Then as we go through the journey, we realize that was because of his emotional concerns, the right little boy for this experience to happen to. So it's not always so in your face that this is like the absolutely most, perfectly ironic character for this to happen to. But by the end, we should definitely understand why this was the right person to go on this journey.
That's a good point. Yeah, sometimes the journey itself is what brings out the elements from them that make it clear why it should have been them. Another example might be something like The Invisible Man. Did you see this one from 2020?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so in this movie, this is about a woman who is, I don't think they're married, but just her boyfriend is a controlling evil mad scientist, basically. And he after she tries to escape from him, he fakes his death to make it seem like he is gone, and starts stalking her in this sort of invisibility suit that he's made. And it's like, through the course of that journey, we come to realize, like, oh, she is someone who has been, putting up with this abusive relationship for a long time, maybe even years of this. And, like, the journey itself is what brings out those traits that are, like, these are the things that have been tested, and this is what is going to become the crucible that will prove that you're the person that needed to, like, be the one to go through this, rather than, like, at the start, it just sort of, yeah, you're right, it's sort of like, this could have kind of been anyone. Sometimes the journey, like, the difficulties of the journey, they highlight why it becomes that person, or why that person is necessary. Motivation and urgency also make clear that your character has to act, and why, and their conflict should come with the highest possible stakes and consequences for that genre. So try not to make it, if it's a movie, try not to make it feel episodic like a TV show, or overly internal like it's going to just be about people sitting around talking or thinking about things. That might be more like a novel. Some common issues, I won't go through all of these, but just a quick summary of these. No hook or no journey if it's just, we call this just an idea for an idea. So if you're like, how about a really intense war drama, kind of like Saving Private Ryan, but set in the Civil War instead? It's like, that's sort of just a description of an idea for an idea. It's like, you got to find a character, you got to find that specific goal for them. You got to just, you can't just rely, a gimmick on its own is not really a pitch. No clear hook stories sound just kind of like down the middle. If it's just more, again, a description of the genre, if you're like a detective gets a missing persons case and must solve the case before the person is murdered, before the victim is murdered, then it sounds like that's just the genre. Go ahead.
Yeah, I will add to that one thing I didn't mention, but that I do is I'm a judge for the Page Awards. And in doing my judging for that, probably the number one issue that I come across are stories that don't have a clear hook. And it's just like you said, it's just like a detective story, or a version of a war movie, or a version of a monster movie, whatever sort of genre this writer has chosen to dip a toe into. They're just doing their version of a thing that we have seen a lot of times, So I think one thing that people should try to take into account for is the passage of time that has occurred in cinema. Like, we look back and we see, oh, there have been a million movies about detectives solving a murder. I can just write one. And it's like, well, maybe you could have gotten away with that, 30 or 40 years ago. If you're looking in the 80s and 90s, you look at all these cop movies, like, we're past that now. So now we've got to have an extra sort of layer on top of those, what have become sort of foundational elements of all these genres. The way I like to think of it is, can your movie at this point in time justify its own existence? If I look at what you're presenting me and I say, well, I can rattle off the top of my head 10 movies that have the same concept from the last 50 years, that are well-known movies, then why should I watch yours over all these other ones? Because you haven't identified a clear hook that justifies that movie's existence right now, because we are standing on the shoulders of everything that has come before us. So you've got to take that into account and be like, how am I separating with a hook?
This is a great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
I sometimes will see people that and especially if they're like a couple years into the journey of becoming a filmmaker or a writer, that I would describe them as they recognize good when they see it, but their only idea of how to become good is to become the things that they have seen. And you want to it's good. Mm-hmm. You want to be able to recognize good when you see it, of course, but you can't stop at my only idea of how to become good is to become the things that I have seen.
For sure.
Execution dependent is going to... Oh, sorry. And then what syndrome is when it's we just have your pitch stops at the inciting incident, basically. Or it's just like a setup for a situation, but we don't have the idea of it. And then they must do blank before blank, which is so key to at least features. TV shows, you can have a little bit more of the sense of this is a setup for a bunch of situations, but remember you're pitching us primarily the pilot. You got to be focusing on the pilot, and as such, you still actually need the and then what kind of element. So execution dependent are pitches where it seems like everything is pretty much there. It just doesn't really stand out because it seems to rely on style, performances, cinematography, directing, or other factors that are just otherwise kind of difficult to communicate. If you start to pitch something like John Wick, then it's like, make sure to emphasize the sort of unique nature of their underground assassin world, and their you might mention in the 90-second version their fascinating currency system that they use, or like the fact that this is basically like it's not even really Earth in a lot of ways. This is sort of like Earth if assassins were everywhere, right? So you got to just be careful to avoid pitches that seem execution dependent in that it's there's not quite enough there that seems to imply a unique story on its own, and that it seems like this would only be good if it was directed really well, or if it had amazing choreography, or anything like that. That would just be, they're not really our department, you could say. Okay, so we have the slide here, and we might just talk briefly about pitching to producers. I can just talk about my experience with this, and Scott, you can share whatever you want. But I will say that a lot of the time they have a specific mandate of like the kind of thing that they're looking for. So you have to know like what genres they are interested in first and foremost. A lot of them will sort of say like, well, we're up for anything. We just want good stories. But then you look at the slate of things that they're actually acquiring, and it's not always the case that they're just up for literally anything. I mean, a lot of people will say that, but they will actually have like a specialty or an area of interest. So you should just be aware of like the kinds of movies that they make and the kinds of things that they are interested in. Or else you'll just be like talking for a minute, and at the end they'll be like, yeah, we don't really do war movies. So you got to do your research first of all, like perhaps even talking to people that have worked with them before, if you have any friends that have pitched them before and know that the specific triggers they have, or things that they get all the time, or things that they're immediately bored by. So just first of all, I would say do your research as much as you can. Second of all, be really open in the room, I would say, to them contributing ideas. And like if they start guessing stuff, it might mean that the story is predictable, or it might mean that they are just engaged and that they're like into it, and they're sort of saying like where they wish it would kind of go. So be prepared to like tailor it a bit in the room to accommodate what it seems like they're latching onto. Any tips, Scott, or any experiences you've had pitching for producers that you would want to share?
Yeah, sure. I think, over the years, the number one thing that I have learned in doing pitches is to focus on emotion, because that's the thing that producers really care about. Like you'll get in the door because of whatever the idea of your movie is, probably. If you're having that meeting, it's either because they read a log line, or your agent or your manager set it up somehow, or they have or maybe it's for a writing assignment or a rewrite or an adaptation. Who knows what the reason is that you've gotten in the door, but it is almost never because we have no idea what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about an idea that we already have a framing for. It's a book, or it's a script of yours that I know about, or a pitch you're going to make me and I want to hear it. So obviously you're going to have to say what the nuts and bolts of the idea are. But what gets them really excited, I have found, is when you can actually tap into the emotional journey of the character, because what is going on in their mind once they are sort of on board with whatever the idea is in a broad sense, they're not like, oh, but tell me all the great plot moves that you have planned to explore this idea. They are thinking, who am I going to be able to cast in this movie in order to raise the money it will take to make the movie? And what about what I am being told right now could potentially entice a great, well-known actor or actress to get into this role? And the thing that entices actors is emotion, and conflict and interesting, bold character choices. Things like that are the things they're always going to come back to after you get through whatever plot you have to get through. They're just going to be like, but what about the character? But what about the character? Where are they at the end? What are we learning? What are the themes? Those are the things that really make a movie great when all is said and done, and those are the things that great actors are generally looking to explore, and therefore what producers are looking to find.
Right. So their mind is always going to be on, how do I package this? How do I actually take this and make it into a viable idea? Because they're always going to view the script as something that the plot itself can be changed, and they themselves might have a lot of notes as to how it should change. But the attractive element will be those characters, which is why we have to really focus on the character in the pitch as much as you can.
Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. Let's look at this. This is from the Pitch a Movie subreddit, and we're just going to give you some pointers on this one before we. And I have one or two quick ones that I'm gonna do just as a warm up after this. Kind of joke ideas, but just fun to think about. This one is called Homeward Hound, and if you have written this and you want to join us, then feel free to do so. But I just picked I scrolled to the 10th page of the movie subreddit and just found this. Okay, so let's see what this is here. This is a horror comedy. This is about a dog that gets bitten by a zombie. After turning, it looks for its owner to find him missing. The owner goes on the traditional zombie movie survival adventure, but instead of following him, the movie only cuts to him occasionally and instead follows the Zomdog's adventure to find its master. At the end of the movie, the owner gets to safety and has that traditional "yay, we survived" ending, but then his dog shows up and he's like, "Oh, no way, my dog found me," and then his dog lovingly bites him. The end. All right. So go ahead, chat. What do you think are some of the issues in this before Scott and I react to this?
Can we unmute, or is it just I guess the first thing that I noticed immediately is that every single beat of it is reactionary to something that's already been done. Mm-hmm. It's like the anti-equation, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, so I see what you mean. You're sort of saying, the more that you're he follows the traditional path of blank, the more you're saying, oh, it's like that other thing you've already seen.
Yeah, but except it's kind of twisted to be but it's not like what you've seen already.
Right. We have some comments in the chat also. What is the dog doing? Yeah, it's we have a description of the kind of adventure that the dog is going on, but we don't actually know what the dog is doing or what it's up against. What specific obstacles might be in its way. Anyone else?
It doesn't start with any comps. It doesn't kind of contextualize the rest of the pitch.
That's a good point.
It doesn't focus on really any emotion. It's all just kind of plot beats.
Right. Yes, that is a good point too. I would guess the comps for this are probably Homeward Bound meets. I don't know what would the other comp be for this. I wonder. Walking Dead.
I don't know, but also, sorry, I'm just. Never mind.
Okay, no worries. Feel free to weigh in the text if you remember what you wanted to say.
I mean, to me, it made me think of. It made me think of Toy Story, and it's you've got an owner basically who the object is trying to get back to. Mm-hmm. So it seems like someone else said it, but the emotion is. For the dog to experience. This is the dog's journey, but this pitch is not telling us at all about that journey. That's just saying there will be a journey. Like, we shouldn't even be seeing the owner and what they're up to. They should just get wherever they're going. It doesn't matter. 'Cause
Right.
what matters is the dog getting there. And what he goes through.
This is almost like a pitch for a gimmick rather than it is, or I described it here in this slide as this is more like a long joke than it is an actual description of the plot events and there's not really specificity in character. The movie's just kind of hard to see because almost all the words of the pitch are used in service of describing the gimmick rather than delivering on the promise of a unique premise in that strong sort of second act. Further, it's kind of difficult to imagine a movie where the main character is a dog that can't talk. So, I mean, if this was the kind of movie, like Homeward Bound is a movie where all the animals can talk to each other. And it's just like, it's tough to have a non-human-like main character for a movie, I would say, for the most part, just because we don't know what they're thinking. I can't think of any examples of movies that have that.
Yeah. Well, I can think of it. There's a great script from the Blacklist a couple of years ago called Yellowstone Falls.
Oh, the wolf one, yeah.
A family of wolves surviving a zombie apocalypse, and it is really great. But it's completely visual storytelling because the wolves can't talk. So it's hard to pull off. It is possible to pull off. So it's one of those things where it's like you sort of write it as a stunt script, maybe, and then if you really knock it out of it's what we would call execution dependent. If you knock it out of the park, people are going to be like, it's great. If you don't knock it out of the park, then people are going to be like, but there's no one who talks in it, and they'll find all kinds of reasons why it doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly. You have to slam dunk it if you're gonna do a triple backflip, then you have to nail the slam dunk, or else everyone's just gonna be like, why'd you do a triple backflip?
Yeah, exactly.
If you ever find yourself also saying that a character goes pretty much on the predictable plot path for the genre, then something's probably very wrong with your pitch, unless it in some way blows those cliches out of the water in some really evident way. So try not to just say, and then basically he does the movie, because that is a red flag that you're just telling us this is just like everything we've seen before. So here's an example. I don't want to focus too much on this one, but this is just one I kind of liked from the Pitch a Movie subreddit, that I like the hook and motive of the journey. You do want to watch out for things like decides to, or comes to believe, or must navigate the relationship between, or just terms like this that sort of suggest a lack of urgency. Anytime you're saying a character must come to terms with or understand something, I usually suggest intangible goalposts and novelistic stories. So that's just like a little red flag to look out for. I don't want to critique this pitch at the moment, but just that's one to look at where it's like, I like the idea of the hook. You want to do some quick silly warm-ups, Scott?
Silly warm-ups, sure.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
I got a little silly pitch for you. This is a joke idea that is also kind of funny to me. All right, this is a sci-fi comedy that's kind of like Don't Look Up meets Okja, and it's called Sweet Green Meat. Or maybe that's Sweet Green Meat? I think I'll just call it Sweet Green Meat for now. All right, so this is like a sci-fi satire, and the idea is that 6 months after a failed alien invasion, an eccentric trailblazing chef like a Gordon Ramsay type unveils a line of addictively delicious extraterrestrial meat products, the perfect food source. He must now scramble to come up with an alternative before society tears itself apart, vying for control of that limited alien meat. So that would be like the log line, and then Scott would ask clarifying questions based on that before I move into like the plot portion.
Right. I guess, yeah, my question would be, why is society tearing itself apart? Is it addictive?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm thinking it's...
because...
well, go ahead.
Yeah.
That's a good question, yeah. And
No, just because there are lots of foods that we eat that feel like this is just great nutritionally. We don't tear ourselves apart for it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like it's generally, if it's scarce, it then becomes expensive, which is good. If I'm a chef, then I've got a limited source of something everybody wants. I can charge a lot of money for it. And it just seems like that sounds great for him all around. So, I don't know why it's his responsibility to stop society from tearing itself apart. That seems like someone else's job.
Okay, I can see that. So yeah, those are great questions. I guess so. Then once you answer those first couple of questions, we usually will launch into like the 90-second version. So I think by going into that 90-second version, I might answer some of those. Also, this is kind of a silly joke idea, so I don't know. Maybe some of these just don't have answers, but
sure.
Let me put 90 seconds on my clock. All right, so this let me start my time now. So, after a failed alien invasion, there's alien corpses all over the world, right? These like big squid-like monsters that people don't really know what to do with. And obviously, in starving areas of the world, at times they've tried to like dip a toe into eating them, but it's really hard to access the meat inside because their blood is poison. So like it's like a fugu fish, you know, like you have to prepare it in just the right way so that it doesn't poison the people. So we follow a sort of like trailblazing, like really eccentric Gordon Ramsay type guy who is going to have this. He has this big premiere where he's going to, on TV in front of all the best food critics in the world, have the first exhibition of perfectly prepared alien meat, because it's his theory that this alien meat is not just insanely delicious if you prepare it right. It's the perfect food source. You only need to eat a small amount of it, and it makes you, it fulfills all your nutritional needs. If you ate nothing but this, you would be in amazing shape. You would never be hungry, and also it just tastes addictively good. So he has this big exhibition, and all of the world's top food critics are like 10 out of 10, 10 out of 10. We need more of this. And so society starts to like really have a hunger for this, and different powers start to try to attain control of the limited supply of alien corpses. So now that the world is sort of falling into chaos, our main character, the chef, has to come up with an alternative food source that's better than this meat. That's why he sort of sees it, because he caused this to happen. He feels it's his responsibility to stop, society from tearing apart in search for this, this elusive, difficult to prepare food source. Everyone's trying to commodify it, and he's trying to now come up with a better food source so that everyone stops, society stops crumbling. And he's got a limited time to do that because, riots are starting to rack the world. They're starting to tear down the, Kellogg buildings, because whichever company has like the exclusive rights to it, they start, wars start over control of this meat. And basically he needs to keep the world from falling to shreds. All right, that was almost 2 minutes, a little long. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I love the broad thought of it, and like I get what you're saying. Like we have all these alien invasion movies, right? And when there's all this carnage at the end, and we just sort of forget about what like the aftermath of that might look like. In one aspect of it being like, oh, maybe we can eat these guys. Like I think that's a really smart idea. It's one of those ideas that seems like at 30,000 feet really fun and comical. But then once you start drilling into it, it does raise a lot of questions. Like, for example, well, one, you're saying there's limited meat, but then you're also saying these carcasses are all over the world. So, like, is it limited or is it not? And how limited is it? If it is limited and people are going crazy and then they tear down buildings and they get to it, then they eat it all, then it's just over, right? Like, what's the ongoing threat, I suppose, is the question. And then also what, from our character standpoint to what I was talking about earlier, is like, what is his skin in the game emotionally? Like I get sort of that he's like, I introduced this idea and now there's like rioting in the streets. I suppose I could see him feeling some personal responsibility to solve that problem. But I think he needs some problem, and maybe you have an answer for this, that he's probably solving within himself prior to this situation, like that, is not just on a plot level. I've got to solve this problem by making the alternative food source of some kind. Mm-hmm. Also, I was just curious, do you know what that answer is, or have you thought about what that better thing? Okay, yeah. Because it is just idea, but yeah. Yeah. Well, these are still the ideas the questions that pop up, for sure, are along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I might think maybe some answers might be that I think maybe he was doing this in an effort to end world hunger. Maybe if he grew up in poverty and like, I don't know, one of his family, like his close brother or something, died of starvation when he was a kid because they couldn't get proper nutrition. Now he's like, I never want that to happen to anyone ever again. I'm going to end world hunger because I know this meat is going to be the perfect food source. And then it ends up actually being perfect, and people can't really handle that. And so like maybe even where this could go is he finds out this was the aliens' plan all along. And that this wasn't even like
there's something.
There's like this is like the aliens.
They were bait. Pets. These are bait aliens. Yeah, to get us to eat them. And then, that's what I was gonna say. If there's an addiction component, like you literally become addicted, then it's a great way to enslave the human race, because you introduce these aliens, you get us thinking, oh, we beat you, and now we're just eating you. But now we become addicted, and we realize these are just like the worms on a hook.
Yeah.
And now we're stuck, subordinate to these aliens who control our food source or our addiction source. There's something there, maybe.
Yeah, and I guess you could go that way, or you could do the sort of more Adam McKay route would be like it's just really, really good, and every corporation wants to now control the meat and like wants to make a profit from it because it's like, you know, it satisfies all your needs. It has all the nutrition. If you only ever ate this, you would look like a supermodel. So like it's less that it's actually addictive and more it's just that everyone wants it because it turns out it is exactly it's more perfect than he hoped it would be. And as for this,
I think my sorry, we don't have to keep pitching on this goofy idea. But.
That's okay. Yeah, I have one more goofy one. But good questions though, and I don't know. I've had this for a while. I'm never gonna write it. Probably. I just think it's funny. So you know.
I mean, it's fun. Yeah, I definitely see the fun in it. You know, just answering these questions is tricky sometimes. Yeah.
For sure. All right, one more silly one for you, and then we'll go into your pitches. So, yep, somebody asked in the chat, can we write our pitches down? And yes, you should have a written version of it for yourself. But you'll need to speak out loud as well and just be prepared to verbally communicate. That's what pitching is. It's, you know, screenwriting is a very social job, and you do have to just get good at being good in a room, which means clearly communicating ideas efficiently. That's what this course is all about. So yeah, be prepared to speak out loud. Okay, so one more silly one, and then we'll move into student ideas. This one's called Small Arms Fire. Sci-fi action. It's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids meets Doom. So, raiding the home of a mad scientist, an insectophobic Special Forces squad leader and his team are caught and shrunken down to the size of mice. Now the captain must lead his friends through the walls, vents, and countertops to find a way to reverse their condition, battling past household hazards and the villain's collection of vicious bugs.
Okay. Well, this is one of those things where the setup I get, but once we're past like Act 1 and we're into that action of sort of just surviving these bugs, what makes this different than something like Doom? It's like I get whatever these vicious bugs are, they're essentially, you know, it's essentially Starship Troopers, right? Mm-hmm. There's bugs and we're fighting them, you know, and it's Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. We're in a small space. Like these are all elements that I've seen before, sort of reshuffled. So like, where is like the actual like premise coming to life in a way that I haven't seen before in the second act of this movie? Is my big question about it.
That's a good question. Should I go into the 90-second?
Sure.
Okay. Put 90 seconds on the clock. So, there is a mad scientist terrorist who is really obsessed with making things really big or making things really small. And in the first act, or like first few minutes of the movie, we see like an attack from massive bugs that he unleashes on Paris. And our main character, the Special Forces captain, nearly dies, and he's traumatized for life and terrified of bugs now. So then this terrorist becomes his nemesis that he is hunting across the globe for years and years until they finally track him down to a regular average suburban house. When they break in, it turns out it was a trap, and the scientist catches them and shrinks them down to the size of mice for use in his experiments in his little lab rat mazes and things like that. They escape, and now that they're in the walls, he's trying to retrieve them with his collection of, you know, spiders and tarantulas and things like that he's sending in after them as they're trying to find a way back to the, you know, shrink ray or enlarging chamber to make themselves big again. I would say that the games of this are going to be things like the fact that we are taking the sort of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids formula and infusing it with the sort of really gory intensity of something like Starship Troopers. It'll be really fun to see them, like, you know, there's little cute situations that are treated with complete seriousness and really scary, gory set pieces. Like, I don't know, you're on a leaf that's going through a river in the backyard shooting giant spiders with a rocket launcher. They're trying to, ultimately, the cat and mouse dynamic between the squad leader and this scientist who's his arch enemy. The scientist, I believe, is studying him this whole time and wants to catch them and put them in his little dollhouses and labyrinths and stuff. So his head-to-head rivalry with the normal-sized person there will provide some extra sort of like scary thrills, for instance, when he catches them and sticks them in pins to his wall, or he puts them through various like mazes that he's built for them. So perhaps one of our squad has been captured and is in one of these like weird sadistic mazes, and they're trying to get their squad member out. So ultimately, they're trying to make themselves big again, and our captain is trying to defeat his longtime nemesis, this bug collecting scientist. Almost 2 minutes and 6, a little long.
Right.
So
I mean, I see what you're saying. You know, like the action of it is as it seems. You know, like given the setup, then the action of the second act is a bunch of military guys in a Honey, I Shrunk Your Kids situation, which is essentially the same concept as Kong Skull Island, just in that the monsters are really big and the people are just normal size. Mm-hmm. So it does become a question. You're just like, you sort of fell a little bit into one of your own, traps of one of your pieces of advice, which is you're pitching tone and you're pitching execution. You're like, it'll be really gory. And these, it's just like, I promise it'll be really cool, like is basically what you're saying. So that means it's like, it's essentially an execution dependent idea. It's like, maybe it will be cool, but all of those things that you're describing are things I've seen in some form or another in other movies at this point. So it's like, yes, you might knock it out of the park and it might tonally overcome the pitfalls that I'm seeing, just like at the start of it. But I won't know until I read the script,
Gotcha. Okay, so what would you say this one, if this was a real pitch, because again, I'm not actually going to write this, but what would you say this would need? More specificity in character, or like a central relationship, or what do you think would push this up a notch?
Well, I just think that I just think that this is one of those things where, I personally probably wouldn't choose to write this script. I could see getting the idea and being like, there's something fun there and exploring it, but I would arrive at this point where I'm like, well, basically what I'm describing is a sort of mashup of things that already exist that I'm not sure are actually elevating either of those things. And so at that point, the question to myself as a writer becomes, is this a yes or is it a no? Am I going to actually write this or aren't I? Mm-hmm. And when I start to see these little red flags pop up where I'm like, okay, I see how at the end of the day, this might not really be as unique of an experience as it seemed when I first thought of it. And I would probably put it aside unless you're going to somehow radically interject some new idea that is going to propel it past those limitations, which maybe that would come up at some point. But I tend to err on the side of throwing ideas away. I think it's really important to throw ideas away, as many as possible. Mm-hmm. Any excuse you can find to throw an idea away, you should, because when you find the idea that you can't find an excuse to throw away, then that's the one you should write,
Right. I think, ultimately your goal is not to write one thing that's going to make your whole career. Your goal should sort of just become it should be to become a generator of unlimited ideas. And that's the only way that you're going to...
I'm not sure I agree with that, honestly. It's like unlimited ideas are not possible. Every idea is not going to be a great one. So it depends on where you're at in your career. If you're trying to break in, your goal should be to come up with truly great and unique ideas. And I don't think an idea like this gets you, in the door unless you somehow knock it out of the park in the execution, which maybe you will. And I'm not saying that that's not possible, but on just purely on an idea level, you're setting yourself up. It's like, how big is the target that you are trying to hit, and the more red flags there are, sort of the smaller the target you need to hit in your execution to make it work. So once you're in the door, then your goal is to just be a great writer all the time, because people are going to read your stuff probably. You could maybe get away with an idea like this if you already have an agent and you already have managers and you already have proven to people that you can execute. So then you can lower your standards a little bit as far as what you choose to write. But when you're at the position of I'm flailing trying to get anybody to look at what I'm doing and give a shit about it, then you need to be willing to throw things away and put your time into the stuff that is like really going to make waves for you, you know?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. I agree with all that. I guess I would just I think that a lot of writers get hung up on just one idea for a long time, and you just like you're only going to be able to throw ideas away if you have a lot of them.
Yeah. I say the flip side is if you're just starting out and this is the idea you have to write, then fuck yeah, write it, you know, because it's not going to be good anyway. Yes. Like when you're just starting, you write everything, and then when you start getting the feedback that says, okay, you can actually do this, your writing just on an execution level is up to par with professional scripts that are out there. Then you need to start being ruthless about what you choose to write, you know. But in the learning process, then for sure, just like generate and write as much as possible. Yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Scott. We have a question in the chat. Kim asks, don't pitch tone or execution, but address the sensor relationship in the logline. How does one accomplish all of this in one sentence? I always think loglines are tricky. I think what we're saying is not to rely too much on the tone or the execution in the pitch. Like those can still come up, but like the uniqueness of the idea should not hinge entirely on those things. And the sensor relationship is usually going to be the thing that kind of it can be a really strong part of the hook. You can like it, and a sensor relationship is also often going to be something that you can use to galvanize a story that otherwise feels like it doesn't really have a hook. For instance, take like a guy has to escape from jail. Nothing super unique stands out about that until we say, I don't know, his cellmate is his estranged father, and now he has to work together with his dad, who was a career criminal, in order to escape from jail. It's like you can use that central relationship to zero in on the hook, I think, a little easier. Do you want to take a crack at this question, Scott, or at giving her any tips for loglines?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a difference between a log line and a pitch, you know, so that's the first thing. It's like when you're talking about a log line, generally the tone should be somewhat implicit in what the sort of genre is. You know, it's a heist movie, it's a horror movie, whatever, you know, so you're not going to, unless you're going for some really kind of unique or specific tone bending kind of experience, then you don't generally need to think too much about the tone when you're in your logline. If it's a comedy, it should be inherent in the premise and the characters that are involved in what's going on, that this is going to be a funny experience, you know. If it's a horror movie, it should be inherent in the premise that it's going to be a scary experience, you know. So but when we're getting into actual pitch where you're spending more than a logline but, you know, a couple of minutes trying to describe something, then I think it is totally fair to then offer tonal comps, like it's going to be, you know, John Wick meets Care Bears. Okay, great. Now I'm starting to see with a little more precision what your vision for this is, but you don't have to spend a lot of time on the tone in the, you know, the pitch, but you can spend a little more time on it. But I think the thing is you don't want to be relying on it, like you said, like, oh, and then it's just going to be fucking balls to the walls, heads exploding, and it's going to be awesome. Like, no, that's not going to do it, you know?
Yeah, and that, I think sometimes people will see something like John Wick or The Raid or something like that, and they'll be like, well, yeah, it'll be cool, like that. And then sort of, yeah, I think we've kind of addressed that. So hopefully that gives you some good tips there, Cam. Okay, so this is what you'll need. We're going to start going into student pitches, so get ready to do this. If you don't have a project, you can pitch us a screenplay or pilot that you've read. So if you want to just like learn how to pitch, just tell us, this is something I read recently, and pitch it as if you wrote it, but just let us know that it does exist. You need the genre, and that can be 2 different genres combined, but don't do more than 2, because too many flavors equals no flavor. I find the more you start adding, if you're like, it's a sci-fi, fantasy, western romance with adventure elements, then it's like, oh my goodness, just you should have just picked 2 of these to be the main things, to clarify what you're going for. We have one sentence, just super reductive. It's about a blank, and when blank happens, she has to blank. A standard pitch is going to tell us about the character's normal life catalyst, break into 2 in the sort of second act, and just imply the trajectory of the remainder. You don't need to go all the way through to the ending. It says 60-second limit there, but don't worry about that. That's actually a little longer than that. Full story pitch would include the ending, and that would be like you have up to sort of 2 minutes for, and you want even longer sometimes, and you want to kind of showcase the character's change a little bit. You don't have to do one of these. You can, like, if you haven't written it yet, the chances are that you don't really know all the way through to the ending yet, so don't worry too much about this kind for right now. The standard pitch we're going to be working with is the ones I was just sort of demonstrating, so like 90 seconds to 2 minutes, tell us the setup, the main character gets into this situation, and now they have to do this before this. That's really all you have time for, and we will have to cut you off if you just at a certain point can't cut yourself off. So look at this little Pixar rule. Once upon a time there was blank, every day blank, until one day blank, and because of that blank, until finally blank. That's like very fairy tale-ish and reductive way of breaking it down, but that is sort of what you're doing. Okay, so I think we are... any other ground rules or things we want to say before taking pitches, Scott? Any other last bits of advice?
No, I'm ready to dive in here.
Okay, awesome. So let's see in the chat. Let's see some title and genres, and we will pick some folks to pitch us.
I lost track of which chat we're in.
We are in the pitch class chat. If you scroll to the bottom of the discussion tab, you'll find it there. I'll tag you in it. There you go. All right. Go ahead and post what you've got, guys, and we'll give you like a minute to do that, and then we'll start calling on folks.
I already did it.
You already did it? Oh, I see. Can you edit it to include the title and genre and all the other stuff that's on this little list here? Thank you. Looks like we have just one posted from Micah so far. Thank you for that, Micah. Let's get some more. Maybe if one or two more people post, then we can start calling on the first posters. And while we are going through their questions with them and their pitch with them, then you can continue to add them to the chats. Does anyone else have one they want to post and share with us for now? I have several boot campers in the chat who I know have feature pitches. Thank you, Crimes.
Here we go.
Dragon Bells. Dragon Bell Z?
Yes.
All right, thank you for that. So I think we can... Let's have Scott pick first. The two that you have to choose from so far are Helen and Dragon Bells.
Yeah.
What do you want to start with?
Might as well go in order here and just do Helen.
Okay.
First.
And this is a pilot episode of a fantasy historical show. Okay, got it. So, hop on, Micah, and start with your title, genre, and clarification of tone. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. This is my pitch for Helen, the pilot episode of Helen. The socially awkward girl who will be called the most beautiful woman in the world invents the role-playing game, yearning for her own adventures, while a strange motley crew of heroes begs her father for help, retaking their city, and get way more than they bargained for.
All right, thanks for that. So that's the logline, and just this is a, did you say historical fantasy show?
This is a historical fantasy show, yes.
Show.
So any questions based on just the logline, Scott?
Yeah, a couple things that... First, I wouldn't make any assumptions that anyone knows what you're talking about. So it took me a minute to then reorient myself and be like, oh, this is Helen of Troy that we're talking about. So knowing that, then I sort of understand what you're saying, but I think you would be well suited to just put in somewhere in here the story of Helen of Troy, or the heretofore unexplored, like misadventures of Helen of Troy, or whatever this is going to be as an ongoing show. It feels like the tone is kind of light-ish because she invents the role-playing game. So, you know, maybe in your genres, there's a way to imply that fantasy/historical makes me think,
Fantasy
you
slash
know,
historical comedy would be better, I think.
yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, like how true to history is this going to be? Because it
Fairly
feels
true to
like maybe
history, but
okay,
yeah, it's not. Obviously, it's based on mythology, so no way
yeah.
there's no way to be
That's why I'm
completely.
wondering about the historical aspect. Like I know that like we consider these adventures of these characters historical in some ways, but they are also quite mythological, and so it's like history gives you a certain implication. I don't know. I'm torn on that, but
Yeah, I'm not sure
my
either.
takeaway was like at first thinking fantasy historical, that makes me think of something like in a tone of like Game of Thrones off the bat
Yeah,
without hearing anything about it. Then you start with socially awkward girl. Then okay, I'm immediately then like okay, socially awkward. That's basically comedy. You know, like that tells me, which is good. Um,
yeah,
so
she's she's gonna be great.
right, okay, so those are just like very big pie in the sky things that like first popped out at me, right? So then what I'm wondering then is like as far as the ongoing engine as a show, you know, she invents the role playing game. I'm not exactly sure what that has to do with anything.
That's
You know,
just
other
what happens when she's bored and before the heroes come.
right.
That's
So
all.
I think that's like unless like playing the game is like an integral part of the story, then I don't know if I would. Is it or
It's a part of the story, but it's tangential unless it's the pilot.
right? So I would say that that's not a significant enough part, maybe without having read it to put in the logline. But it would just be like, who will be called, you know, the most beautiful woman in the world. I think it's a nice detail. Maybe not
Oh, yeah,
essential, but I get it. But
the
like, it's
leader of the
basically
story.
is restless and yearning for more. It basically is like what her situation is, right? So that's um,
Yeah,
getting closer to the heart of the matter. Whereas we say who invents the role playing game, so then I'm like, oh, is this about the invention of the role playing game? Was the role playing game in fact invented by Helen of Troy, and I never knew that? Is that what I'm getting out of this show? Okay,
that,
then it would be important, you know. But since that doesn't seem like what it is, um, I wouldn't get bogged down with that in the logline because it's creating some confusion, you know.
yeah,
Um,
she does invent it, kinda, but yeah, it's just a random thing that happens, a wacky thing that happens on the way when Helen gets bored.
So I guess
Yeah,
just
but
to
I
have
think when
some.
you put
Go
it
ahead,
in the
Scott.
log line, it starts to pull focus. I guess is things. What were you gonna say, Connor?
Yeah, I was just basically agreeing. Like, you have so few words to use in a log line that we assume that everything in there is integrally important and that one thing is sort of leading to the next thing. But her inventing this role playing game is like you might as well have said she plays darts and then this happens. It's like that's just a thing that's not actually causing the next thing to happen. So it just feels like misplaced use of words in the log line itself.
Yes.
Interesting because it's gonna be interesting because yeah, they're gonna do. Well, I was thinking they'd do something like related to each character's fate.
Okay, that might be cool. So why don't we move you up to the pitch portion and you can tell us more about remember
Yeah.
just the pilot. So don't go beyond the pilot. Don't
Yeah,
rely.
no beyond the pilot.
Right. Only
Yeah.
pretend the pilot is like a little movie, and just tell us about this story. I'm gonna have the clock, and I'll have to cut you at 3 minutes, but just do your best. Tell us when you're ready.
Okay, so basically, it starts with Helen in a castle or fortress called a Megaron, which is like a. I'm really killing this today.
You wanna pause and start over?
That's okay.
Let's pause and start
all right.
over.
Okay, no
Yeah.
worries. Yeah. So I guess just it's tough. Just relax. Just pretend like you're telling a story to your friends. Like you don't have to get too into the details of like the names of things or places.
So basically,
Go ahead.
I'm gonna start at the very beginning, which is how Helen and her family. Helen has two brothers, Pollux and Castor. They're both they're not really a part of the, well, that's the series, but they're a part of the first episode. And oh god, I need to try this again.
One more time? Okay, I'll reset it one more time. Okay, so
One more time.
Start at the beginning. Let us know when you're ready.
Can I offer some tips before you dive in even?
Go ahead.
Just think about Helen. What is the situation we find her in? What does she want? And what interrupts her everyday life and sends things in a new direction?
So
that's
Helen,
what the show is.
So Helen is in a castle. Well, not a castle. Technically, it's called a Megaron, like I said. And it's like this big palace place where she's free as long as she does what they want. Meaning her parents, the king and queen of Sparta. And she's going to be married off someday, but she doesn't know that. And she decides that she wants to go see the world. And she starts kind of... She was abducted by Theseus as a kid, but that doesn't matter as much for this. And she ends up meeting with this... How do you explain it? She ends up having this group of heroes who are coming from a place called Mycenae, where they were exiled from. And there's this tyrant called Aegisthus, who's trying to take over all of Greece, they say. And he's like a real nasty piece of work. And he's taken over the city, and they're begging the king of Sparta for help. The king of Sparta refuses because their armies are busy, like, fighting off. Their armies are all... Their best men are off fighting the oh god, what was its name? This boar. Their best men are all off hunting this wild boar that all the heroes are hunting, including Helen's brothers, later on, who go off to hunt the boar. The Caledonian boar, yes. Big freaking hog. Anyway. So, yeah. They end up... Helen ends up going to the heroes' camp and finding... Helen ends up going to the heroes' camp, and she ends up finding a lot of... And she ends up meeting with the heroes and getting tested, and... Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. So that was... We're at 2:45. Do you want to start, Scott?
Okay. Sure. Well, it seems like where you're struggling to sort of figure out how to say what you are trying to say is in separating Helen's journey from what is happening at large in her kingdom and where those two things intersect. So when you find yourself going on like sort of tangents and then you're saying, anyway, that's not from this, or actually that happened before, or whatever, that's a sure sign that you're not focused on like the real heart of what the story is. And when we only have 90 seconds or 2 minutes or however long, you don't have time for that stuff. So you need to organize in your head in a hierarchical structure what is the absolute most important thing to know, and that is that Helen of Troy is a princess who lives an unsatisfying life in a castle, in ancient Greece. Okay, that's what's essential, and then
heroes.
Right. And so then, but you can't just say then she meets the heroes, that she's living her life, and somehow then it's like, meanwhile,
Heroes beg for
this
help.
this is happening in the kingdom. These two things intersect when the heroes, whoever they are, approach Helen or raid the castle or whatever they do that gets her attention. You can't.
They just beg. They literally kind of. Oh, I don't know if begging for help would be, or begging for supplies, or.
Well,
begging
what literally happens? Have you written this, or are you still figuring it out?
I'm still figuring it out a bit,
Okay.
but yeah, it's somewhere between.
So
it's in the outline phase.
right. So you need to figure out what literally happens. That's a concrete moment that is important, because if the story is going to be about how Helen's life intersects with these heroes' lives, we need to know where and why that intersection occurs. You know, she has her life and she knows she has some sense of what's wrong in it that she wants to correct by exploring the world. But she must feel like she will never be able to do that because she's the princess and she has family duties, and she's not allowed to just go be free and, you know, see the world the way maybe other people can, you know. But then these heroes come along, whatever they're doing, that's what you've got to figure out. And she sees those people are living a life kind of like what I would like to live, you know, or something like that. Or they come to her and they're like, we're desperate for the aid of your father. You know, I don't know how they're getting to her. You know, these are things that we need to understand, but like, you need to know what the tentpole essential actions are, and then make us understand emotionally why they matter to Helen and how they're going to change her life and send it in a new direction to sort of accomplish what her overall goals are, you know?
Yeah, I think that they should actually attack. Maybe.
Okay.
Because that would be more active, but I'm just thinking. Yeah, maybe they should attack the Spartans and get jailed.
And then she escapes.
It's possible. I mean, like you said, she could escape with them. It's just, you know, this is just somewhat loosely maybe based on things that, you know, are at least rumored to have occurred. So you want to look at those events and say, well, if there are any events you can draw from to figure out what that intersection might be, that, you know, is a good thing to do. But if you're going to whole cloth invent, you know, an attack on the Spartan like castle or whatever, then you just need to understand what are the motivations for it and what are the ramifications of it, and why would Helen align herself with people that are attacking her family's castle, you know?
Yeah, I think they'd be interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting if they were attacking, but maybe they were just on a stealth mission, just to get rid of Aegisthus or something.
Okay, so I think we have to move on from this one, but hopefully that's given you some good things to think of, and maybe just like, remember, you can come back and bring this to the other classes in this course and work on and refine this pitch as you go. So just because, you know, even if you don't have all the ducks in a row for it right away, then throughout this course we'll be improving these. So thank you for this, Micah.
Yeah, thank you.
Excuse me, you're welcome.
Oh, all right. Let's go with, I want to know about Dragon Bells from Crimes.
Yeah.
Hey, there's a joke in there somewhere.
Right.
So just going off from the start, reading logline and all that, I'm guessing, right?
Yeah, start with the title and genre.
Right, okay. So Dragon Bells, this is a very mixed up genre of noir dark comedy with a jukebox playlist in the background. I guess the most feasible comparisons would be The Nice Guys by Shane Black and Under the Silver Lake with David Robert Mitchell. The logline is two underachieving detectives traverse their growing city searching for a mistress who's gone missing in order to win against a rivaling agency that spirals out of control into a much more nefarious conspiracy in somewhere USA 1979.
All right,
Okay.
Thanks for that. So just based on the logline, let me just make sure that I want to paste it in the document here just so we can all be looking at it. but a couple questions just based on what you have here so far. The first is that I don't know what it means to have a jukebox playlist. You're sort of just saying the movie has a soundtrack. What does that mean?
Yeah.
What is it? In my earlier kind of comps, I had compared it a bit to like American Graffiti, where it would very much like kind of set to needle drops specifically for scenes. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't think that
Well,
would come
it's
up in
you're
the-
talking about style, yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yeah. I'm sure you're going to say the same thing, but
Yeah.
you're injecting a style, a directorial choice, essentially, into like the pitch. It's sort of what we were talking about earlier, where you're just like, trust me, it's going to be awesome. So we're just have all this awesome music. You know, it's like that's maybe it will, maybe it won't. But it's not a genre, and I don't think it's like the type of thing that you want to include at this level of the pitch.
This early into it, I'm assuming. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So other stuff with this one, I mean, noir dark comedy. I think we totally get what you're going for there. You list in your comps make sense. Nice guys. This is the kiss bang bang, Shang Black under the silver lake kind of neo noir dark comedy thing. So I'm totally with you on that. When we get to the log line, there's not a protagonist though, which is tripping me up. I mean, you normally need a protagonist with these things, even in this genre of movie. You know, it's who's the protagonist of Kiss Kiss Bang Bang? It's Harry Lockhart. Even though we have that partnership at the core of it, you almost always want to focus on the protagonist just in terms of the logline. Like a family is not a main character, a group of teens is not a main character, a couple is like not really a main character. So I would say try to usually frame this.
So honing down on one of them.
Yeah, I would. Go ahead, Scott.
I would just add to that. I think the two-hander is a real thing, but then we need to like understand what the separation is there. I think so. When you're saying two underachieving detectives, you are saying two of the same guy are our protagonists. Whereas if we look at something like, say, Lethal Weapon, you have a family man and a suicidal cop. You know, there's an ironic juxtaposition. So we can understand how these two characters can be at the heart of this movie. But if you just say, if Lethal Weapon is just two cops go solve a murder case, well, that's nothing, you know. But two ironically juxtaposed cops, now I at least see, even though the plot machinations are just murder mystery stuff, that the personalities of these guys is going to be what is driving this and making it exciting or fun to watch.
Right, yeah. It's sort of like, it's the difference between the guy has to break out of jail story versus guy has to team up with his estranged father cellmate to break out of jail story. It's like the central relationship will clarify the hook a lot of the time. Because in terms of the plot itself, and we'll let you go into the pitch in just a second. I just want to say, it's a little odd that you say that they're solving a missing persons case primarily to win a bet, implying that that's more important than framing that as their central goal, as opposed to normally we'd say like they want to solve the missing persons case before the victim gets murdered or something like that. It's just the like nature of their goal seems a little strange to me. I guess you're sort of saying that their rivalry with this, well, first of all, it's rival agency. It wouldn't be rivaling agency. That spirals out of control. So I think you're sort of saying that the plot is going to focus on this rivalry more than it does on than on the individual case, or maybe this case is what brings this rivalry to its big head or big climax of some kind. But just the description of the plot itself feels sort of like a description of the genre to me.
Got you. Okay.
Yeah, it seems like you're hanging your hat on the bet, right? Like it's saying like using the bet to minimize the missing person is a hint at what the tone is, right? This is a fairly nihilistic black comedy world where we value the outcome of this bet over the life of the victim. Right? That's sort of what you're getting at, right?
Kind of in that sense that it does focus mostly on the missing person case, but still at the core of it, they're kind of pursuing this for somewhat selfish reasons, right? At first, but then it starts becoming something more human as it grows. It becomes more detached from simple pettiness.
Okay. So maybe we better, unless you have one more question, Scott, maybe we should just let him go ahead with the pitch.
Yeah.
All right, go.
Sure, yeah, I would just say I think that is a fair motivation, but yeah, it's not like totally clear in this log line. But yeah, go forward. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Whenever you start, I'll start the clock.
Okay. right, let's go. Dragon Bells is a stylish and far-out noir comedy filled with sex, drugs, lies, and murder taking place within the fictional town of Somewhere, USA, Nevada, circa 79. We follow a solitary and underachieving detective and his extroverted Vietnam vet partner as they are inquired by a recent widow to track down and find the mistress of her deceased husband in order to sign a signature, or in order to get a signature. Despite being quite invasive of the job at first, they're egged on by a rival agency due to the fact that they're referred to as bottom feeders, detectives that live off of taboo cases instead of real hard investigative work, which fires them up, making them want to push and prove that they are wrong. From there, what follows throughout this psychedelic odyssey is a rogues gallery of characters that are all centered around the disappearance of this girl and how that connects to the death of the widow's husband, which leads into many dead ends and many very kind of out there scenarios.
Okay. Thanks for that. A nice timing. It was
that's
like
it. Okay.
52
Nice and tight.
seconds. Yeah. Well done. Okay. So maybe I'll take this one first because Scott took the last one first.
Sure.
So I think this is it's like an interesting world, and you're in the world of Inherent Vice and like this sort of like psychedelic, almost like this sort of stoner detective genre, which I think there's
update, yeah.
yeah. There's legs there, and there's interesting stuff there. But I think you spent at least like the first half of this on just backstory and just setting things up, whereas I think that we need to know for a pitch like we set up in like one sentence, this is this guy and he lives like this and he wants this. Then one day this inciting incident happens, and because of that they need to now go head to head with this. So I think we're just missing like the kind of focus on specificity and events, and this was more just like describing the kinds of things that happen, at least to me. I think that the more that you can find like really attention-grabbing and visceral and just specific details as early as possible, the more that we will be sort of on board, rather than if you spend a long time just describing like the generalities of the idea. I think that the more specific you can get, the stronger the pitch will be. Not saying that you have to go all the way through every single beat all the way to the end, but just like specificity and focus are going to be my main notes for this. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got that specificity pretty much as much as I might expect in this short amount of time. Just like an underachieving detective, his Vietnam partner, they get this case. It is escalated by their situation with this rival agency. That's all fine for me. I think where I start to, lose interest is when you're like, they then go on a psychedelic odyssey. That's sort of the thing that we were talking about before, where it's like you're talking about the tone of the experience and not like showing me what is going to be the sort of like unique experience of this movie. Because as you identified, it's like Inherent Vice, right? Okay, when you say to me, oh, it's just like Inherent Vice, and then I am like, well, we already have Inherent Vice. We already have Under the Silver Lake. So what do we need this for? What do we need this for? And I'm not getting that when you're just like, it's going to be, trust me, this psychedelic odyssey is going to be so fun and cool. Like, it's like, okay, well, prove it. Okay, maybe I'll read the script and maybe it will be. Maybe you have found some way to do that. Like, that is going to just knock me on my ass when I read the script. But in the pitch, I'm just like, okay, I guess I have to take your word for it, because you're not giving me like concrete moments or ideas that are saying, look at this specific thing that is going to happen, and I can just immediately recognize that it is cool. Like it's essentially the screenwriting maxim of show, don't tell. Right now you're telling me it will be cool, but I need you to show me how it will be cool. The other thing that I would point out is like all the comps, and this is sort of a more broad note, but like, or something to think about. All the comps that have come up in this conversation are all essentially auteurs, writer-directors who have complete control and have proven themselves over decades in the industry. And as screenwriters, for better or worse, we don't necessarily have the same flexibility that someone like Paul Thomas Anderson has, or someone Mitchell in doing Under the Silver Lake, who have both proven themselves to have a singular cinematic vision, which is different than I am trying to sell my screenplay for someone else to then probably direct and produce and like do all those things. And I don't know if you're a director or if your hope is to direct this or whatever, but since we're talking about pitching, the idea being we hope to sell our screenplays, you know, you be careful not to look at what auteurs have done and say, oh, well, Paul Thomas Anderson did a movie like this, so I can do that. It's like if at some point you prove yourself in the way that Paul Thomas Anderson has, then maybe you can. But as a spec that you're trying to sell to somebody, you need to make it attractive in and of itself, considering the fact that they don't know who you are, you have no track record, and that means the pitch and the idea needs to stand on its own legs without just saying it'll be like these other movies from these great auteurs that we all love, you know?
Right.
Thanks, Scott.
Okay.
And thank you for this pitch.
Thank you for the feedback.
Sure. So it looks like we've got 20 minutes. We've got probably time for 2 more, which is good because it looks like we have 2 more in the chats. Any just like general things that you want to say before we move on to another one, Scott, or just like advice that has occurred to you?
No, that's...
You want to move to another one?
Yeah, let's do another one.
Okay. We have a rom-com and a nature mockumentary. So let's see. What do you want to pick the next one? Because I think I responded last to this most previous one.
Sure. I mean, where I'm not. I see. Did this closure pitch get copied in here anywhere?
No, she actually down lower. Okay. She was like,
she left.
We'll do it next time. Yeah. So we've got Happy Hour, which is romantic comedy.
Okay. I see. And
I wasn't saying I'd do it next time. I was just saying I would read. I can just read it to you guys without you reading it.
Oh.
You're not able to open a PDF though. You can't see the PDF.
I can't have a PDF open, and also this page that I was displaying on my video display at the moment. I mean, can't. There's no way you can paste it into the chat.
I've tried 100 times, Connor. I can't pick it up. I can't pick it up from there. It won't copy.
Okay.
I did it on my iPad, so those different methods don't work that you were talking about.
Okay. Well, in that case, I can try to bring it up. But do you have just like the logline and just the 90-second version ready to go?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. So the title is Closure. The genre is it's a legal thriller. The comps that I would have would be The Accused from 1988, Jodie Foster to Kelly McGillis, Fracture from 2007, Anthony Hopkins, Ryan Gosling. Just for tone, I kind of mentioned I'd recently seen Unforgivable with Sandra Bullock and Viola Davis. So it's not that dark, but it's got some similarities in feel. So anyway, throw that out there. And this, after listening to a few of these that you guys have done, this is not as I didn't know how to do this at all, so it isn't very pitchy. I guess it's not quite the way you're doing it. It's not as specific, perhaps, as you want. But anyway, so the log line is it's Closure. When several small-town cheerleaders accuse a nationally beloved high school football coach of rape, an obsessed prosecutor must battle the town, the national media, and her own painful past in order to bring him to justice. And then, you want me to go straight into...
Maybe pause right there for a second.
Okay.
I'm going to try to paste the text into... There we go. I might just have to adjust the text right here. But you can read this off my screen if you need to, Scott, if you wanted to review that back.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I ask, is this in any way maybe like a true story, or is this just something from your own mind?
Just from my own mind.
Okay, yeah. Because my immediate thought is maybe something like an Aaron Brockovich or something. I bring that up because, again, this thing that keeps coming up is like these types of stories, like the 2 comps that you gave us, are from like 88
Right.
2007,
Really
a
old. Yeah.
a little more recent, but 15 years old.
Yeah.
And so the thing that has occurred in the span of time, even since 2007, is that stories like this, where we're just like, a person tries to, deal with like a sort of heart-wrenching, but like somewhat straightforward case of just like an accusation of rape, has become relegated to television. This is the kind of thing that we see on Law and Order every week, basically. So, and now you're going for a more character-focused thing where it's like it's about this small-town obsessed prosecutor and whatever her particular emotions and, history with this type of subject means to her and how that's going to manifest on the page. And maybe you'll knock that out of the park, but just purely based on the information that is here, this sounds like a type of story that we have heard a lot. There have been a lot of movies about this in the past, and that today would be a little more comfortable on television than it would as a feature, because the hook is not big enough and clear enough to like get people to go to theaters, for example, at this point in time.
Okay.
So that's like my first note. And again, it's execution dependent. I'm not saying a script like this could never work, but when you pitch it, just based on the pitch alone, the person you're pitching to is going to say, okay, like, not like incredibly exciting. Maybe you have just like written the great American screenplay and it'll be incredible, but I'm not necessarily chomping at the bit to get at this based on the concept,
Right. Gotcha. Well, and the reason I reached back to The Accused is because that's the last thing I know of that even touched this topic, really.
Well, I think that's partially because of it all getting into like television legal.
That could be. Yeah, I don't know
dramas.
I don't know about how much rape and how specific they've gotten, but
quite a bit.
But I hear.
Yeah.
Okay, I hear you.
I mean, watch SVU. That's been running for 20 years. Every week, it's rape.
Yep.
Oh, really?
So.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't do television, so I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, should I even go on, or?
Yeah, go ahead. Give us the 90 seconds.
No,
Okay.
go on. I'm not saying that means this is necessarily a lost cause. I'm saying that you need to know what you're working with so you can set your expectations accordingly. And generally speaking, a concept like this, now where we are in cinema history, needs to be executed like essentially sort of perfectly, to like give us a reason to have another one.
Right. No, I get it. I totally get it, and I appreciate that. Okay. No, and I sort of know I'm outside the funsy tone these days. So, okay. So this is about a 90-second synopsis, somewhere under there.
Okay.
And I actually threw some stuff in here because of the meaning of it that's outside of what you guys are sort of teaching. So the first paragraph or so is a little different. Anyway, so I say, picture the Me Too movement played out in Middle America. My script is called Closure, and it's about the devastating and diverse toll that sexual assault takes on the lives of victims and the daunting stakes of standing up to famous, respected, or even beloved perpetrators. Imagine a reclusive but high-powered prosecutor destined to become LA's next district attorney, risking her career to return to the small town she turned her back on years ago in order to prosecute a famous high school football coach accused by multiple women of rape. The coach, in addition to winning championships, is known and beloved for turning young men's lives around, helping them get into prestigious colleges, starting many on their way to NFL glory and bringing fame and commerce to the once struggling town. So when the prosecutor brings the victim's accusations to court, few people are willing to listen, and few witnesses are willing to testify. And the high school, the entire town, even the national media attack, intimidate, and shame her and the victims relentlessly. Even the prosecutor herself, while bravely standing up to the hatred, finds herself slowly recalling events long buried that have left her personal life a lonely shambles as she continually sabotages her relationships and any chance at love. When the pressure of the mob finally implodes the case, severely damaging her reputation and career, she still refuses to give up her quest, devising one last Hail Mary pass sacrificing herself to finally bringing him to justice.
Sacrificing
So
herself.
it isn't. Yeah, basically. Yep. You know, could be her career, could be her life, it could be her safety. Whatever. I didn't know how specific you wanted me to get there, because that is toward the end. So I realize we're not supposed to really go to the end. I didn't get very specific with things that happen, in the Fun and Games or B story. I didn't do a lot of things you're talking about now. I just this morning went, oh crap, the class is today, I better write something. So so that's what I came up with. And it's a little more narrative than pitchy. It's a lot more narrative than pitchy and probably too verbose or wordy. So anyway, have at it.
Okay. Thank you for that, Susan.
You
Go
want
ahead.
to start, or you want me to start? Yeah.
Why don't you start on this one?
I don't really have a lot of questions. I think that is all really good. I see the movie. I don't have like a lot of questions about what it's going to look like or why this is an important story to her, or what her journey is. Like, it all tracks really clearly. And so I think that's really good. If I were a producer, my thought about it would probably, if this is the type of material that I was producing today, this would probably be attractive to me in a lot of ways. But my big question would be like, where are the parts that I haven't seen before? And also, I think one thing that is like sort of a new wrinkle that we've got to compete with is all the true stories and biopics and things like this that are out there in the world. And does this actually compete? Like, that's why I asked you if this was true potentially at the beginning, because if this was a true story that had not been told yet, then this would be a great project, because that's really popular right now. And we're seeing these stories emerge in real life because of the Me Too movement. So it's like the example of the Olympic women's, like the gymnastics team and all the abuse that happened there. If that doesn't get turned into a movie, I'll be shocked. On some level, a limited series or many stories like that. So we've got things like that out in the world. We've got our Harvey Weinsteins and all these characters. Our Bill Cosby's that are the true stories that are out there right now that are touching on all these ideas, almost all of which are probably in development, to be some kind of movie or at least a documentary or something, And so the question then becomes, can a fictional version compete with the reality, and will it somehow be more exciting or more interesting and justify it to be a feature film rather than an episode of Law and Order? Whereas like Law and Order now also is on a trend of ripping things from the headlines. So if you watch the new season of Law and Order, they have an episode on Bill Cosby. It's a Bill Cosby stand-in, but they're talking about those issues and they're doing it on primetime television, so that's like where my big question are. It's not that it doesn't sound like in the classic storytelling kind of way, like a dramatic structure and a character in a situation that is narratively compelling. It's more about where we are in the world right now,
what will sell,
and what you're in competition with.
I think this was one of my major thoughts too, is that like if it's a really well-trodden story space in one sort of arena, and one of those arenas might be real life, like for instance, imagine all the war in Ukraine kind of movies ideas that people are kind of like working on right now, and I know it's like a little too early to probably make any of those, but you better believe they'll come up pretty soon after the war is over. Then it's like if you came up with an idea that was like, we're gonna have this really compelling war story set in the war in Ukraine about a refugee trying to escape, it's like, yeah, that probably happened, but is that gonna argue for its existence in comparison to all the real things that did happen? And like if what you're presenting is actually substantially better than any other things that did happen and that did exist, then maybe it just is fantastically written. And like, I think this is just the kind of thing that does have that element of execution dependence in just that, like I like this, the connection of the character to the material is good. It just might sort of be execution dependent in terms of like this it just has to blow everything else out of the water that it kind of could be about. I don't know if that makes sense, or that's not quite even fair, because I know that we're trying to always, like, you gotta just try to write something on your own that feels like it will stand on its own and just write the best story you can. But there will always be this question of, like, is this better than the things that it's comparable to?
Well, and I honestly, from being in your classes for probably almost a year now, I've kind of gotten the impression that it's a slim chance in hell that we'd ever sell anything, a new person. So I'm kind of figuring it has to go indie. It has to go even writer-director. My son does direct, so I could probably, it's not really his thing, but this isn't. But, you know, but I don't really feel like that's even a possible thing for me to sell something from what I've heard. It's very rare.
That's definitely not true. It's certainly rare, but the reason it is so hard for so many people is because they aren't holding themselves to the highest possible standard as far as what they could be writing. You know, so like this is a script that you could write it, and you might write it very well. Will you write it well enough to overcome all the red flags that have been identified? Maybe, maybe not. But you have the decision now going into it to either embrace those red flags or not. Whereas you could put this aside and say, well, what could I write that actually does have a chance of selling? Like, those things are possible to identify. You know, where do your interests intersect with the market's interests? You know, I personally don't ascribe to the idea that, like, you should only write the thing that you are absolutely to the market or to your own taste. You need to figure out where is the overlap, you know. And if you're looking at that and you're like, literally there's no overlap, I want to only write insane, like David Lynchian, you know, magical realism. Okay, well then you might be one of the people that is in that unfortunate boat. But like what you're talking about, doesn't sound to me like there is zero overlap with what is possible to get sold. It's just missing some kind of element. Like, if it's going to be a fictional story that you're writing, you need to amp it up a little bit or find some way into it, or some shocking aspect or turn in the story that is going to then justify its existence. And it doesn't mean it's not possible. It's just that you haven't maybe gotten there with it yet. You know, what the story you're telling is like the standard, most obvious, most straightforward version of what this story might be.
Well, it isn't ultimately. Yeah. I mean, in the end, it's not as obvious. But I do have another one that is the next one I would work on is probably much more marketable right now, or at any time. So, you know, currently. So, and it's more of a dark comedy, so a very different kind of a thing. But right now, I'm just trying to learn how to write a script, and I'm trying to learn how to write a pitch, you know. So I appreciate all this. It's really, really, really helpful, and I do like to hear what I'm up against and what I need to do improve and whatever. But again, for a given story, if you have a passion for that particular story and it is what it is, other than fixing flaws in my writing or execution or something, I can do that. Sure. But in terms of completely changing the meaning of it, I think just one last question, then I want to let you move on. But are Netflix and these other, you know, I see honestly a lot of crap like on Amazon Prime and stuff. There's a lot of stuff like, really, you produced this? But you know, are those at least options for getting stuff made? Is it more likely for features to be made with those buyers than it would be to go straight to the theater kind of thing?
Well, I think if you look at the movies that they make, you'll see trends in the types of genres they tend to support. You know, the legal thriller is generally not one. It's sometimes, there are
a lot of crime things though, and
yes, there's tons of crime, and then a lot of the decisions that go into making such movies, you know, have to do with who the person is who wrote it, what stage they are at in their career, who they knew, who knows, you know, like a lot of things can help a thing that we might as outsiders look at and say, how did that piece of garbage get made? Well, one,
exactly.
we don't know what it looks like when it's sold. We don't know, who wrote it. Were they someone who is breaking in with their first screenplay? Likely
Right.
not.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
so we need to, or at least if you're in the stage where you are trying to break in, you need to push all the stuff that is out there out of your mind, and all the things you might compare what you're doing to out of your mind, and say, what can I write that will help me break in?
Okay.
And that question is something that justifies its own existence, is the answer to that particular question. It doesn't mean that other things that are lesser than what you write are never going to get made either. Like, things get made for all kinds of reasons, but as someone trying to stake out a claim and get someone to pay attention to what they're doing in this business, that is a different game you're playing than all the people who are past that point,
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right, so we're going to just make our last couple minutes for questions, so let me just really quickly read off homework for next time. Prepare a 1 to 2 minute verbal project pitch, so based on what you've heard today and the things that you have been working on today, you might have to write it out and practice the timing. And also, please read at least one recent Blacklist script or TV pilot, and try to prepare just 1 to 2 minutes on that as well. So this can also be something, if you have absolutely no time to read anything, then it can be based on something you have watched. But it's good to always remember, be reading at least one pro script a week if you are participating in ScriptCamp. We want to continue to read pro material, because to become a fantastic writer, you have to become a very prolific reader. So here's the schedule for the camp again. Yeah, people need to read. You got to read scripts. So I even say, if you're in the feature boot camp, read 3 of them a week. Though, 1 minute.
I've already broken in and had produced features. I read basically a script a day.
There you go.
So
yeah,
I think that's incredibly important.
You never really get to stop doing it, because you gotta, you gotta maintain, you gotta know what people are doing now, and what has been done and ways that it's been done, and you're always learning and always adding new sort of techniques to your repertoire. So here's the schedule for the camp again. Remember, this is just 4 weeks, so by the end you will have a much more refined 1 to 2 minute pitch. But you can bring a couple different ones to the classes and try to pick which one you want to be for the final presentation if you want. What's next? There's lots of things coming up at ScriptCamp. So today at 4, there's table reads, bring up to 5 pages, and we can have the group read it and get feedback on it. There's many other things to look at here. New feature bootcamp starts up very soon, this upcoming Friday, 4 to 6 p.m. That's in just 5 days. So if you want to write a feature all the way from beginning to end in just 8 weeks, come to that one. We have playwriting, TV, pitch, and rewrite camp, which a new one starts on the 16th from 12 to 2. But so go to our website, scriptcamp.net. You can find a calendar of all upcoming events. And here's many different weekday classes coming up too. And then if you've not enrolled but you want to enroll in this class, go to scriptcamp.net/classes, and you can buy the course on its own, or you can sign up to become a member at scriptcamp.net/membership. Here's a breakdown of the membership options. And also check out Script Hive, which is a server that we cross-promote with all the time. And they have a huge directory of thousands and thousands of scripts to read. So if you're looking for material to check out, that is going to be the place to go. Remember, type $store into the chat if you want to figure out how to use the coin system that we have here. And if you are in this group now, send our co-founder Nacho a message with your size and address, and you can get this free ScriptCamp t-shirt. So let's open to... last thing. Referral program. Refer a friend. You will get a free month, and they will get a discount. So please refer as many friends as you want. All right. So for just this last, couple minutes, let's just see if anyone has questions. Alien Boy says, can I pitch my idea? We're out of time for the pitches themselves, but if you come next week, then you can pitch then. Remember, if you've not signed up, you can get a free trial. So you'll be able to pitch anything that you want next week. And we had a few more that were in the chat. So thank you to Willow and Kim. Come by next week and you can pitch those. Questions about pitching for me or Scott?
I have a quick question, since you won't have time to read my pitch.
Go ahead.
So obviously I'm writing a rom-com, and sometimes I feel like I don't know if I have the right person. Let's say in theory I could get a pitch across, which I don't even know who I would do that to, but what if that person isn't into rom-coms? What if they're just totally into I don't know, war movies or something, how am I supposed to market myself if that's kind of the direction like I'm going?
Well, this is always a danger. I mean, this is why you have to do the.
Yeah.
You can go ahead, Scott, if you want to. But
No,
this is
no,
why
no.
you do your research and you find out the kind of stuff they make, the kind of stuff they're into. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to say the same thing. Generals, when you start to have reps and they start setting up general meetings for you, you will absolutely find yourself face to face with someone who has no idea who you are, what you do, nor do they have any interest in the types of things that you like to write. So it's like going on a blind date sometimes, and then you just have to be personable and ask questions, and maybe through the course of that conversation, you will find some common ground, and you'll say, oh, we both saw this movie or liked this or that, and you'll figure out through the course of that conversation, is there anything here? Is there any way that we could possibly work together on something if it's not the thing that I, came ready to pitch? And that's just the social aspect of being a screenwriter, which is obviously the thing that all of us writers loathe the most, but is an undeniable part of the business, is being able to just navigate situations like that, But ideally, these meetings you're setting up either for yourself or if you have reps that they are setting up for you should be with people that have some interest in what you're doing, So I say that situation is possible and I have been in it, but it should not be common, And if it does keep happening, then you need to ask yourself, why do I keep taking meetings with people who have no credits or interest in things that I am doing? It shouldn't be just take any meeting you can get your hands on at any time necessarily. Though in the beginning, I know it feels like, and maybe you should for a little bit just to get the hang of doing general meetings and stuff. But at some point, you're going to be like, okay, some of these meetings are definitely a waste of my time. So I need to be a little bit more careful about who I'm actually committing to meeting with.
Right. And normally they'll be meeting with you because they read something of yours. So
yeah.
Again, that's why it's so uncommon, is because if they wanted to meet with you, then chances are then they're into that kind of thing, even if they have no interest or ability to make what you pitched or what they read.
Totally.
One more question. Someone have one more question? Crimes, is this a question for us?
Oh, no, I was just adding on to the conversation before.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Do we have to? Does anyone have one more thing they want to ask before we call it?
What's like the best way to get across? Huh?
You're good. Go ahead. What's the best
way
to get across?
Sorry, I didn't mean to talk. We both started talking at the same time. Yeah.
What's the best way to get across, like, I guess, the dynamic that you would go to see the movie for? I guess the character dynamic, without straight up just telling what the plot is. I don't.
What's the best way to convey the character?
Well, those are two different things.
Yeah, go ahead.
Right? Character dynamic and plot are two different things, right? So if there is a specific character dynamic that you want to get across in the pitch, and like we were talking about before, a movie like Lethal Weapon, it's a fun action movie, but the action is not what we're invested in that movie. It's their central relationship. So if I was pitching Lethal Weapon, I would say, this is a story about a family man who gets partnered up with the suicidal cop, and that dynamic, that relationship is what this story is all about. Along the way, this is what's happening. They're investigating a murder, and there's this fun set piece and that fun set piece. But each of these moments is serving to speak to their core conflict and their core relationship. It's not just about going through the motions of plot.
Yeah, if that dynamic is going to be at the heart of what's fun about the movie, then the situations that they're in should be tailored to, these are things that are going to be made more fun by this dynamic in some way. So, like, that's what you can, like, good cop, crazy cop is the pitch of Lethal Weapon, basically. So you got to set up situations where we're like, good cop, crazy cop in this situation will handle it in this very fun way. And then in that situation, they handle it in that kind of crazy way. And that'll, like, start to bloom in our mind and suggest, oh, okay, so I can see how that is going to lead to a series of, successively larger explosions throughout the story that are going to, bring that relationship to some kind of, climax or conclusion. And so, yeah, if I will say, if that dynamic, if you feel that that's really central to how the story works, then make sure that the situations they're in are ones that are going to be amplified by that dynamic.
Yeah, and that really goes for like pretty much any idea, like pitching plot and set pieces or whatever your story is about. It just will cause people's eyes to glaze over if you're not connecting it to how it serves the character in those moments.
Yeah. Thank you for the question, and we're a little over time, so we're going to have to call it here. Scott, thank you so much. This was so fun.
That was my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and hope everyone learned something. And I'll come back anytime.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And again, if you've not signed up, remember scriptcamp.net. You can do that, and you can get 3 more of these classes in this course, or you can sign up for one of our many others. Featured, TV, plays, rewrites, all sorts of stuff. Feel free to send me a message if you have questions, or email help@scriptcamp.net if you would like to know more. All right, we're going to call it here. Thanks so much, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your weekend.
Thanks, guys.